Hi, everyone. Welcome to the PC Gamer Show this week. I'm Evan Lottie, Editor-in-Chief at PC Gamer. Glad to be joined by Chris Livingston, staff writer. Hey, Chris.
Hey, this is my first time live on the show in the studio.
How exciting. All the way down from Sacramento, California, just a little bit north of us. And to my left, in digital form, the man, the Hearthstone legend, literally, Tim Clark. How's it going?
Sadly, not literally. I fell one rank short this month.
Oh,
yeah,
gosh.
Heartbreak.
We have to restart the show, guys. I can't bear any bit of inaccuracy. But I'm really glad to be sitting down with you guys, Tim as a monitor and Chris as a person, talking about some interesting stuff this week. It's VR week on PC Gamer. We've been writing about VR all this week, covering that thing. You know, it's interesting. It's exciting to sort of have like console launches in a way in PC gaming, too, in you know, I guess the Oculus this week, and we already have a Vive Pre, but we're going to have the consumer edition very soon, so that's exciting. Talk a little bit about that, but also the recent controversy in Overwatch, a big point of discussion throughout the gaming community this week. But we're also going to be talking about Fallout 4 Survival Mode, which you had a chance to play, Chris.
Yes.
And some other stuff. So stick around. Should be fun, guys. As always, as Tom always leads off our show, he's out of the office this week. We want to talk about what we've been playing in general, and I'll kick it over to Chris to start.
Well, speaking of VR week, I've been playing Adrift, which is if you've seen the film Gravity, you probably have a pretty good idea of what Adrift is. You're in a space station, you're orbiting Earth. There's been a horrible disaster, as is what happens every time anyone goes into space in a game or a movie or a book. Everything has gone wrong. And it's a first-person game, and you basically need to escape this space station somehow, and it's massive. It does take place in the future. It's not like the International Space Station. It's like the ISS times 50. It's huge. And it's all broken apart. There's debris everywhere. And using your spacesuit controls, you kind of have to navigate your way through and try to find some way to safety. I haven't yet played it in VR. I'll be doing that later today. I've been playing at home on my desktop. And it's a really beautiful game. I think the animation is really amazing. You know, you see your arms out in front of you when you reach for something, or when you open a door or interact with some object. In terms of the game itself, I'm not really loving some of the things you have to do. Specifically, your spacesuit is leaking oxygen, and you need to refill it.
Right.
And you need to do that pretty much nonstop.
Yeah, when I played it, I mean, so you're sort of floating in first person, and you're seeing your arms, and you're sort of swimming through space, right? That's the experience in this kind of broken apart space station. But at least I only played like the first 10 minutes or something, so maybe it's not the case later on in the game, but it almost reminded me of like Outrun and those old arcade racing games where you have to cross the checkpoint and get that time extend, except that's the oxygen that you have to like continually like reach that goal. And I understand urgency is kind of a good thematic fit for being trapped in space and everything's kind of falling apart, but I also want to like look around and investigate and feel stuff out. And I felt very pressured to move forward, like almost like a Mario level where the screen is automatically scrolling for me.
Yeah, that's really the feeling I have. I think it almost feels like, did they maybe think that players wouldn't try to explore on their own unless they were really driven? And it's a shame, you enter these really beautiful environments. There's all sorts of different modules to the space station, so there'll be like a botany module or a communications array, and it's hard to really take it all in because you're constantly searching for these little tiny floating oxygen bottles. It makes it kind of hard to appreciate some of the stuff you're seeing. I think, I do think some urgency would be great. I think maybe I would appreciate it more if it were restricted to maybe certain portions of the game, like, oh no, your suit is leaking, you have to find enough oxygen in this portion.
Right.
Not, I think, start to finish, it does feel like kind of a task, and it is really fun, like the first few times, because you're reaching for it, and it's floating, and it's twisting, and you're just trying to grab it, and But once you've done that, and I'm not exaggerating, probably over 100 times, it's and in maybe 5 or 6 hours.
Thirsty for that air.
It's
thirsty.
And you do, like, you can upgrade your suit later so you don't need quite as much, but it's still this constant thing that you need to think about. And I just feel it was a little too, I don't know, a little too ever-present in the game.
I feel like running out of air as a mechanic in games, whether underwater or in space, is like literally never fun. I can't think of an example of it that was ever enjoyable. Like Dead Space, there were very brief bits where you would go outside the main station and you would be short on air and have to do that. And it was kind of fine because it felt like a little intermission, a little change up of the gameplay. But having it as a core mechanic, because I played it as well on the Rift at the GDC recently and would echo like everything you said. The first thing you want to do when you're in the space is just explore and chill and like look around, but you can't because there's this oxygen-shaped gun to your head the whole time. And the thing with something like Outrun is you always know to get to the next checkpoint, you just plow down the road, right? You just keep going. Whereas with this, you're kind of like, well, do I head to that bit of debris or do I head over there? And you don't know, so you choke out. And then it's like, it was really trial and error-y what I played. But James was under the impression, who I think also played it, that further in, that was less of a core gameplay mechanic, but it doesn't sound like it is.
Yeah, I mean, later on you reach these stations where you can upgrade your suit and it'll give you more capacity for oxygen and, better thrust and things like that. So it does take a while, and you still do need to, keep finding it. And, I mean, once it's been in your head for so long, and once you've, like I did, you wind up going in the wrong direction, you drift out, and then you can't get back, so you just sit there watching the screen until you asphyxiate. You just feel like, it gives you this feeling like I should be close to 100% as often as I can.
Sure.
And it really takes away, I think, from the experience, because I think it otherwise is a pretty enjoyable experience.
This was the game created by Adam Orth, right? The ex-Microsoft guy who famously had to quit or was fired after the Deal With It Twitter rant about Xbox One's always on stuff. And I think James also said that he had been led to believe that thematically, the being blasted out into space and abandoned and like suffocating was meant to be like an allegory for that experience.
Oh boy!
But I don't know whether James is just winding me up.
Yeah, I think that's true.
But I guess it probably is.
I'm not sure. I don't want to speculate too much, but yeah, looking forward to your reviewing your impressions. I think 3D space and the Z-axis in VR is very interesting. There was a funny tweet on social media from somebody who used to work with us, actually, Jeremy Williams, and it was him playing. What's that popular game called in VR? Anyway, he was like trying to put his head through a floor tile, but it was in the ground, of course, and it turns out you can't put your head through the ground in VR. The floor will block you.
Yes.
That
could be a problem.
And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but Wes and Tyler just put up a story yesterday about how walking is one of the biggest challenges in VR because it's what you want to do. You immediately just want to move through these environments, but you're restricted, obviously, by the space. So, anywho, Tim, what have you been up to lately? What's your plan?
Aside from my failed legend climb, I managed to tilt all the way back down to rank 5. I've actually been playing a game called Overland.
Yeah.
Which is it's not in early access. It's just the developer Finji. They're the guys who did Cannibal back in the day. They're based out of Texas. They're kind of like a boutique studio working on. They describe it as a mum and pop operation. They have like a number of other projects. I think they kind of support other developers too. But anyway, Overland is it's like a roguelike where each level is a square. It's a kind of, they call it like a road trip across a ruined continent, the continent being America. But each level is like a square that you view kind of isometrically, and it looks like a kind of a little tilt-shift camera diorama with the characters on.
Yep.
You start with one person who's like randomly generated. It's a roguelike. They have like kind of traits, like the person might run a zine or have like a secret in their past or whatever, and a car, and you need to immediately find gasoline and other survivors. Because you'll soon be beset by these kind of scuttling insectoid creatures. So it's turn-based, so you have like 2 action points. You move around the map trying to grab up, weapons or health kits and stuff, looking for gas in dumpsters and other kind of like burned out cars, which doesn't got gas in, before you're overcome. and it's like it's really tense and I think interesting because Adam Saltzman, who's one of the main developers on it, he described them to me as like little spatial puzzles. So there's like a meta game between the levels where the amount of gas you've got, say you've got like 10 gallons in the tank, you can decide whether to kind of go to a nearby town, which might use like 6 gallons and have like some resources, but they're quite easy and safe to grab up. Or you might do a more risky drive to grab another survivor, but there's going to be much more of the, I don't know if they're aliens or mutants or whatnot there. So you're like every moment in it is this kind of little risk-reward trade-off. And it's hard, it's brutal. I had to kind of learn to get used to like where I position the car so that I could use an action point to like yank in a survivor. And some of the levels you look at and go like, this just can't be done with the kind of the people I've got on the action points at my disposal. But you can like bug out of those, but then it costs you more gas. So you're constantly kind of making those sorts of decisions. And some of the really nasty stuff would be like, I wrote about this in the piece I did on the site. Like I ended up having to like potentially use one of the dogs I'd befriended as like a distraction just to buy myself enough time to, it was really depressing.
And you're a dog owner.
I'm a dog lover. My girlfriend got very angry when she saw what strategy was unfurling. But yeah, I recommend checking it out. It's really good fun.
Great. Yeah, that sounds really good. So sort of an Oregon Trail, Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy Tactics. I mean, is it a tactical game or a puzzle game? It's grid-based, I saw there, but...
I'm glad you picked up on all those three things because I would say they are all definitely touch points for it. It is grid-based, yeah. I mean, like, you can't play it at the moment. If you want to play it, you have to get onto their mailing list because the next thing they're going to do is like a paid alpha thing. But like, it's pretty polished. Like, I'm not sure what amount of money is going to be involved, but they said it was coming fairly soon.
Great.
But yeah, Oregon Trail, definitely Walking Dead if you like that sort of stuff.
Cool. So what I gathered there, Tim, is that you're part of a prestigious mailing list. Wow.
I just sent him a DM saying, "Can I try your game?"
That's what real journalists do. We just DM people on Twitter asking for stuff. It works, guys. So yeah, myself, I continue to play Darkest Dungeon. I feel like this is probably the 4th or 5th consecutive week I've mentioned that. Terrific game. I'm finally pushing through the end game, like building a highly optimized party, spending all my resources that I've earned so far to invest in some characters and kind of push through the end. I know there's going to be like a new game plus situation awaiting me at the end of that, so that's cool. Otherwise, though, I've been playing Stardew Valley. I'm filling in for Tom this week, and I'm sort of taking the Tom role. Been playing it with my girlfriend. It's not really my kind of game. I didn't really play Harvest Moon, but my girlfriend is like way into The Sims, and figured it'd be a good kind of more Eastern style type of game along those lines for her. So.
There's no breach and clear in Stardew Valley at all, right? You're not like just waiting for that level to happen.
I'll have there are cherry bombs in the game, and I haven't used one yet, but I'm looking forward to blowing up some stuff. No, there are like little dungeons or mines that you can go through. They're very simple, sort of slime enemies and flying enemies that come at you, and you're just trying to get lower and lower to get more resources and minerals and stuff like that. But yeah, I've been enjoying it. I mean, it's always interesting, I think, to play something that is made by one person, because you really get a sense of who they are through the game. It's almost that kind of direct relationship you have with them, so that's pretty cool. And I think it's sort of, I'm enjoying the sense of mystery, I guess, in a game like Stardew Valley, where it's not a spoiler. I mean, a meteor falls on our plot of land, basically, and you can't break it open until you upgrade your pickaxe enough, kind of like Minecraft. So it's unclear what's in there, and there's like a wizard's tower on the west side of the village, and what does that do? And there are all of these like sort of seasonal events, like little dances and social events with the characters, and they're upcoming, but you don't know like exactly how to prepare for them. And different fish can be found in different types of bodies of water at different times of the day, and what benefits do they provide, how much are they worth, and stuff like that. So it's a fun little process of discovery, I think, and it's definitely a game that eventually you like play with a wiki alongside you, and I'm kind of enjoying those games more. Darkest Dungeon is definitely one of those games.
Right.
So yeah, it's pleasant. One negative thing, or one criticism, I guess, for Stardew Valley, it's like weirdly hard to click on stuff. It is a game ostensibly about clicking on things, and I struggle to click on them plenty of the time. Good example, like say like a TV is like a, I don't know, 2x2 kind of object in the game. you have to click on like the lower portions of the TV in order to activate it. And that's true of, I think, almost any object. Like the vertical space, so to speak, isn't how you activate it. So like when you go up to a cash register, you're naturally just clicking on the person trying to talk to them, but actually you need to click on like sort of their lower body or something to activate it. So that's kind of weird. I think it's just part of the engine that this guy built or how he coded things. But otherwise, a pleasant little game for sure.
Yeah, I've been, I would say probably once a week I go to the Steam store and I kind of hover my mouse over the purchase button. And my fear is that I will really like it the way Tom likes it, and then I will lose a great portion of my life. And I would like to do that someday, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for right now, I'm like, I don't need to get really addicted to something else. So someday you'll have to tell me more about your experience with it and see how much you wind up actually really liking it or not. So.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm just committing like 90 minutes a night or something, so it's not too bad.
I feel like I want to get addicted to something else just to break some of the Hearthstone spell. And I've been watching James playing Dark Souls 3 over my shoulder because he sits on the desk next to me. I'm just trying to decide whether I've got the stones to go in or not. I know it took him like 25 tries to beat one of the bosses yesterday, and he seemed pretty he seemed like pleased but broken at the same time.
Yeah, I was watching him play this morning when I came in, and I was like, oh, you know what? This looks great. I think maybe I want to try it. And then I watched him struggle with something horrible, and I thought, maybe not.
It's really good looking on the system he's got. I'm not sure what he's got in his computer, but I know it's much better than mine.
Yeah, I have to admit, I've been peering over his shoulder too, and we are going to have James on the show next week to talk about Dark Souls 3, and he's very deep into that game. We're going to be writing a lot about it and sharing guides and tips and stuff like that for you guys. But yeah, it looks so good compared to how it looked on PC, Dark Souls 2, and my curiosity is piqued. I'm still sort of philosophically opposed to not be able to cancel my animations in that style of game. It's just, I can appreciate it. I can appreciate how technical it is and the restraint that it takes to kind of commit to individual moves, but it's just not for me as someone who likes like motor skill, Twitch-driven games. But hey. So virtual reality we want to briefly talk about because it is VR week on PC Gamer, and we're writing a whole mess of stuff about the Oculus Rift, the Vive, and all the experiences within. And yeah, I think Tim, you've probably spent the most time with both platforms out of the two of us here. We're definitely going to be providing you guys with a greater sense of kind of which platform we're favoring over time or why, or which, the Vive or the Rift is kind of providing different experiences. We want to point that out for you guys. But, Tim, right now, what's your sense of what distinguishes these two platforms, if anything?
During GDC, I tried a bunch of the Oculus Rift launch stuff, and I've had like a Vive pre here in the apartment for a while. In fact, it's right here. The distinguishing thing at the moment is that on the Vive, there are very few things that you would call actual games. There's a lot of kind of proof of concept, tech demo type stuff, whereas the Rift definitely has game type games like Tom Marks, who's normally on the show, reviewed Lucky's Tale yesterday, which I had a lot of fun with. But I think Tom, having played more of it, found it got a bit repetitive, and they reused quite a lot of ideas and assets, and that kind of like slightly took some of the shine off it for him. As for the actual headsets themselves, I think it's a really like perhaps non-helpful thing to say, but I think it's a little early to tell. Like, I personally find the Vive more comfortable, but it's substantially more expensive. I find the experience of being able to stand up and move around with the Steam controllers right now like really interesting and like a kind of, I don't want to say game changer because that's a huge cliche, and I know that the Rift's getting its own things further down the line as well. My main thing has been, as someone who I think maybe a bit like Chris came to VR like a little skeptical about like whether this just would be faddish and that something the industry moves away from in a few years. Like whenever I try something that feels genuinely new in it, I come away like really excited about the whole shebang. And even like you mentioned earlier, the thing Tyler posted yesterday, which was Wes's interview with Jason Rubin, talking about how they're going to handle locomotion and moving around. Like, I'm fascinated by how they try and fix that. During GDC, I went to see Valve's demo, their behind closed doors thing, where they were showing off again like more proof of concept stuff, It was kind of aperture themed, like jump around from different experience to different experience. And seeing just how a company like Valve, with as many smart people as they've got, are wrestling with the idea of like, how do we do movement? And they seem to have settled on this kind of aim and hop to teleport type solution. But then other things I tried at the show, notably the Paranormal Activity demo, used the touchpads to move you around. The Paranormal Activity demo was a personal disaster for me on several fronts because
it sure was.
It was a gift, but it was a gift for the rest of us.
It was a gift and a gift. A gift that did 8,000 upvotes on Reddit of me screaming like a terrified child, because I was terrified, and I wasn't like putting it on or kind of playing it up for the camera. I didn't even know I was being filmed. It was in like a little booth just upstairs, tucked away at GDC, and the game is being made by some people from LA who are like have a movie background, and I guess have like procured this license now that they're not making any more films. And it's kind of like really, the actual content is like pretty cliched. Like you're in a haunted house, like stuff moves around, things kind of go bump behind you, figures appear suddenly when you don't want them to. You have to, but because you're moving around in it, the sense of peril is unbelievably heightened compared to watching a horror film. And I watch tons of horror and like consider myself like an aficionado of the genre, and I found it deeply unpleasant. And like I said, the videos in the piece we put up about it, I screamed 3 times at what I would say a fairly mild, what in a film would be fairly mild jump moments. And in one instance, I found myself like wanting to like lash out and defend myself against the antagonist. And I think it's just like, not to say that like, you know, horror is going to be the great thing that makes VR works, but I think it's indicative of like the potential power of it.
Yeah, I'm curious to get your thought. Like, I know certainly the trend within horror, certainly mainstream horror, has been toward the more extreme over time, if you look at film. And I think you would have to expect, there's going to be, people are going to get really excited about the opportunity to really directly affect people and give them these kind of experiences that like get under their skin. But would you almost advocate for more subtle horror experiences potentially being the more interesting long term? Or how would that take place, do you think?
I think you would definitely be able to create some pretty artful, subtle stuff with just minor hints that something's wrong. But someone somewhere is going to go, how far can we push this? How unpleasant can we make it? And I think there was a trend a while ago in like New York, especially, but I'm sure elsewhere as well, to make like actual ghost houses staffed by actors that were really, really unpleasant and kind of adult themed. And I'm sure like the same approach will be taken to VR. And one of the things that came up in the Jason Rubin interview we ran yesterday was they asked him, and he's a guy who was at Naughty Dog for a while when they were doing Jack and Daxter, then he was boss at THQ. And Wes was asking him like what experiences he really wanted to see happen in VR. And he talked about like stuff like Skyrim and Far Cry Primal, where you have these huge kind of expansive worlds you can just kind of wander around in. And honestly, like some of the demos I've played, especially on the Vive, where it's just been like you're dumped in somewhere really pretty and said like have a look around, they're really affecting. Like you're not going to want to be in them for 20 hours, but whoever cracks being able to move around, because that's the problem. It's like as soon as you find yourself in one of these places, human instinct says like explore, go and look, see what's around behind the tree and under the rock and whatever. And obviously you can't do that. Like you can see the apartment I'm in, you can't quite, if I move the camera, you can't see it, but there's like, so one of the Vive sensors is up there in the corner, and then one is like in front of me here. So it's a very small play area. And I find myself, I'll bump into this chair I'm sitting in, or I'll kind of like come up against the window. I mean, it warns you before that happens. You have this kind of like green holodeck grid that kind of overlays within the space to show you that you're reaching the edge of the area you've demarcated. But there's this constant tension between you like wanting to move, basically, And I don't know. It's one of those things where like I understand why people are skeptical about VR. It's been something that's been talked about for probably 2 decades as like a coming technology. It's incredibly expensive. There isn't like a single piece of software you can point to now and go, here's VR, and you have to experience this one thing in it because this one thing is going to just amaze you. But I know, talking to the guys who ran the PC Gamer Weekender event we held in London a couple of weeks ago, like the people who, and VR was one of the things there, the draw for that was like, and the excitement around it was like really huge, because I think nothing can substitute, despite all our lovely words and opinions, nothing can quite substitute the experience you get from putting it on for the first time and trying something that's cool. I sound like an evangelist now, don't I?
Maybe you are.
I'm selling the VR Kool-Aid.
No, it is really, really difficult. It was like, I remember before I had an HD TV, I just had a standard definition TV, and there'd be commercials on TV for HD TVs, and like, how do you sell how nice that looks when I'm looking at it through my old crappy TV? And VR kind of almost has that same problem where unless it's sitting on your face, it's hard to really get an idea of what it does. I mean, you can imagine it, but you probably can't quite get it.
It's certainly a big marketing challenge for them. But yeah, good to get your updated impressions, Tim, and your sense of how horror may be used for good or evil within that medium. But moving on to a very different topic, and just want to give a final shout out to our VR Week on PCGamer.com. Feel free to check that stuff out this week. Everything from setup guides to kind of exploratory stuff and game reviews. Our first VR game reviews. How do you know? That's been fun. But this is one of the most read stories on our site, and I think big topic of discussion over the past couple days on Twitter and elsewhere.
Discussion in some cases.
Yeah, discussion in some cases, and fervor in others. I don't know. That might be putting it nicely. But if you haven't heard, a lot of people got upset about the removal, the planned removal, I guess, of a pose from Tracer, who's one of the characters in Overwatch, Blizzard's upcoming first-person multiplayer combat game, whatever genre we're assigning that these days. And yeah, this sort of started from a post on the Overwatch forums. Someone called attention to a victory pose that this character Tracer had. She's sort of like the sparky British, like Scout alike, basically, Scout replacement in Overwatch. Mm-hmm. And I think when you have like the best play of the game in Overwatch, your animation plays. So, right. And these are sort of customizable things that you can unlock through these loot crates in Overwatch. So every character has a few of them, and they're very prominent, right? Like when you're the best, you're the MVP, basically, they're played across the server. Everybody sees it from like a single perspective. And someone basically called out in the Blizzard forums like, hey, this kind of doesn't really jive with her character, who's kind of more playful. I guess we can show the pose right now for context. There it is, gosh. And yeah, Blizzard basically wrote in, Jeff Kaplan, who's the creative director, I guess, on the project. We've interviewed him several times. He's been with Blizzard a long time, and he basically agreed and was like, I'm trying to find his quote here, but
I know that it sounded like they had already kind of internally been maybe having some doubts about this or second thoughts about that pose. And I read the original complaint, and it was very well written and well thought out, and I'm going to use the word reasonable. The response, also very reasonable. And that's great. I mean, it's great during games development that if you have a reasonable concern, you can express it, and the developers can also be reasonable with their response. And then, of course, it all gets drowned out by, I don't know what to call it, pants wetting, shrieking from a huge number of people who, I don't know, just have a massive problem calling it censorship, saying, I don't know what else they've really even said, but it's something that keeps happening, I think, again and again. Yeah, so
it's hard to summarize what is like a response of thousands or perhaps even tens of thousands of people. But yeah, a lot of people objected to the notion that this pose was not sexual, and other characters in the game make a similar pose. Why cut this one out in particular? You're too sensitive. You're overreacting to. You're oversensitive to something that is totally innocuous. And I agree. Like, the pose is not overtly sexual to me, and I think that's a totally subjective thing that everybody kind of makes up their mind about what isn't sexual. It's obviously a cultural thing, a personal thing, but I tend to agree with the argument that it doesn't exactly line up with what I know about this character. She's playful and funny and sort of mischievous, I guess. And yeah, I guess like you can make the case there's probably a better pose you could build for this character in terms of game design. I think that's That's probably the best argument, not on the grounds that it's offensive or something. I don't really see it as offensive personally, but.
Yeah, Kaplan said that the posts have been called into question from an appropriateness standpoint by players in our community did help influence our decision. Getting that kind of feedback is part of the reason we're holding a closed beta test, but it wasn't the only factor. We made the decision to go with a different pose, in part because we shared some of the same concerns, but also because we wanted to create something better. We wouldn't do anything to sacrifice our creative vision for Overwatch, and we're not going to remove something solely because someone may take issue with it. Our goal isn't to water down or homogenize the world or the diverse cast of heroes we've built within it. We have poured so much of our heart and souls into yada yada. It would be a travesty for us to do so. Like, it's a tricky one. I think, like, because Blizzard certainly has a history of making, like, they make fantasy games with fantasy characters, and some of those characters, like, are a bit sexy, and I think that's probably fine. Like, I'm certainly fine with that.
Yeah.
I think here the disconnect or why the discussion happened was exactly as you said, because that character hadn't ever, like, been billed as, like, the sexy one. So maybe, like, it just felt like pretty lazy to have her doing not lazy is the wrong word, but, like, just cliched, I guess, to be doing the kind of the butt flash win, because people are saying, like, oh, the dude Hanzo, the samurai, does the same thing, like, he looks over his shoulder and you can see his back. But I think there's a difference between, like, a big bearded dude doing that in a long coat or whatever he's got on versus the old skin tight leggings. But I mean, I didn't feel like when I first saw it, I didn't feel scandalized by it. And I was slightly surprised it blew up, but then equally, I'm not surprised at all when it then degenerated into, like, a complete dumpster fire of a discussion.
I think the reason it did blow up, Tim, is, you know, there is a discussion among some gaming communities, and some people are concerned that developers are sort of caving to the interests of a single fan or, like, a handful of noisy fans who they feel are oversensitive or offended by something, or are urging representation be expressed in a different way, and sort of like they see this as, like, another sort of tally on that wall, like, oh, Blizzard capitulated to feedback on a forum, when honestly I think this is something that has happened throughout the gaming industry throughout history, right? Developers have always listened to fans. They've had venues. I went to GDC, and hey, you know, Deckard Cain was a fan submitted name that Blizzard selected because they had this little contest that they ran, and they liked Deckard Cain. That's like one innocuous example, but developers listen to feedback. It's their game. It's, you know, they get to do what they want with it. We are free to criticize it. You're free to criticize it. That's awesome. But the notion that, like, this is like a novel thing of, like, yeah, only now in this modern age of, like, you know, social issues and our developers, like, capitulating and changing their games to make them more diverse or something is...
Well, different fans care about different things as well, right? I mean, you mentioned, Devin, I think when we were talking about this yesterday, the Mass Effect 3 ending controversy, you know, which was a thing that a bunch of people felt strongly about. I didn't. I thought I was fine with the ending, didn't care at all. And I thought it was, like, in that instance, I thought it was dumb that they listened to the feedback. But each case is separate, right? And in each case, like, it's down to the developer. Like, to say we've received this feedback from either a small, medium, or large part of our audience, and now we, as the creators, will decide whether to act on it. Like, you can't paint yourselves, I think, if you're these angry folk, as kind of bastions of cultural liberty, and then say, like, the developer doesn't have the right then to listen to opinions, right?
Yeah, and I mean, what was it, a couple months ago, id revealed their Doom box art, and everyone said, that sucks, can you make something nicer? And
it did.
It did suck. It made something nicer with a bunch of demons on it. I don't remember anyone screaming that they were being forced to do it, that it was censorship, that it was, you know, their original idea, their artistic expression was being censored. Everyone was just like, hey, this art stinks, can you make something nice? They did. They made something nice. I don't know where the brigade was at that point, I guess probably because it didn't have something to do with a woman in a game, that I guess they don't worry about that.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine another world in which that box art had been, you know, the Space Marine cozying up to, like, a sexy lady with his gun, and you know, there'd been, like, people had said, all right, we want different art. Then it would have become like this exact sort of discussion. Like, I don't know, like, the people who make the games are free to create whatever they want. People out in the wild are free to have opinions, and then it's up to them whether they want to act on it or not. But the idea that there's, like, some I don't know. It's such a mess to wade into, isn't it? I can already feel myself sinking under the water.
I could also suggest, if you do want to look at a butt, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think many people enjoy looking at butts. There might be other places besides a video game. I mean, I haven't done any research, but I think if you go to the internet, which I think is located at theinternet.com, with a capital I. Capital I for internet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So if you go there and you type the word butt into a box, I think there's maybe 10 or 15 pictures of butts that you can look at. I don't know if they're
You're absolutely
different
right.
butts. They might be the same butt.
I'm seeing them right now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There's at least 10 pictures of a butt.
Look, I'm all right with butts being in games in the right set of circumstances. I don't think games have to be like a butt-free zone necessarily. Maybe I'm pro butt, Chris. That's what I'm saying.
I'm pro butt too. But I think maybe if a butt is removed from a game, even if I enjoy the butt, I don't see it as like an infringement of my, natural born right to look at a butt in that.
A First Amendment issue.
Yeah, probably not.
Okay. Well, those are our thoughts on the subject. I don't want to spend too much time of our podcast talking about a reaction to something so innocuous. I think much ado about nothing sums up our feelings. But let's move on to talk about Fallout 4, because that remains one of the bigger games to have released in the past few months, and it's about to get a pretty big update in the form of its survival mode. Of course, the DLC. We actually reviewed the Automaton DLC earlier this week too. Or was it last week?
Yes, Phil did.
But Chris, you've been spending some time with the beta version of the survival mode, and why don't you run us through exactly what that changes? There's an article on the site right now. You can dig into more of those details. I'll bring it up here. But what does survival mode change?
So, in an effort to, I think, provide not only a bigger challenge but some more immersion, it's basically turning Fallout 4 into more of a survival game. You need to eat, you need to drink to keep your energy up. If you don't eat or drink enough, you'll get tired, your health will start to suffer. You can no longer fast travel, so you have to get everywhere on foot. If you want to go to the other end of the map, you're going to have to make your way there alone. They've disabled manual saves and most auto saves. If you want to save your game, you have to find a bed and sleep for at least an hour. Sleeping is another thing. You need to do that regularly, and if you don't, you'll start to feel the effects. There's also some, increased damage both for you and enemies, so you will probably find them easier to kill, but they will also find you easier to kill. Probably one of the bigger things I noticed was the little mini map or the radar that used to show your enemies marked with a red dot. You don't see them on that anymore. And I didn't think that would be that big of a deal, but it kind of is, because when you're sneaking around and they hear you, they start, of course, talking about, oh, I hear something. That's the way of the game lets you know that they're there. But I guess I was just used to looking down at the radar and seeing the dot and seeing where they were, and now I can't do that. I actually have to find them. And more than once, I just would run around a corner, like literally into an enemy, and it was a really big change. That never really happened. Whenever an enemy is in range in Fallout 4, you get something on your radar, and that is a really kind of a really cool change. And all this type of stuff, it makes you really kind of slow down, be more cautious, be more kind of critical about where you are and what you're doing.
You wrote that you were like crouch walking the first part of the game because you were so sort of cautious, and because you take more damage, but also enemies take more damage. They're sort of more realistically, they can't take like 10 headshots or whatever from a laser gun.
Yeah, and there's changes, a lot of health type changes. So you get radiation poisoning in Fallout 4, and you can take Radaway, which cures you of that. But in survival mode, it also damages your immunity. When you take Radaway, you'll clear up your radiation poisoning, but it lowers your immunity for a while. Probably the same way anti-radiation drugs actually do. I mean, it's probably going to kill every bit of good bacteria in your body or whatever. It leaves you vulnerable to illnesses. So it's kind of like these things that help you also have drawbacks. They really need to think like, well, I've got some radiation poisoning. Maybe I should wait and not cure myself because curing myself could leave me, susceptible to something else. So it's kind of like they're trying to give you more to think about with just about everything you do. And of course, when I started playing, the first thing I had to do was spend about 10 minutes dumping almost everything out of my inventory because your carry weight, you can't carry as much anymore.
Oh, boy. Plus
things like stim packs and ammunition, things that never had weight now do. I just dumped so much stuff and I still was too heavy to move. By the way, if you do try to walk when you're over encumbered, it will eventually damage your legs. So this is this is some pretty cool, I think, fun stuff. I mean, this is a bit along the line of how I used to play Skyrim and Oblivion. I liked not fast traveling. I liked trying to make sure I ate and slept regularly. So this is kind of that type of thing I used to do voluntarily, but now you can actually do it in survival. And so yeah, the ammunition was the main thing. I pick up ammo. I never sell it. I never, even if it's for a gun I don't have, I just why not keep it?
Hoard it.
So yeah, all that type of stuff I think is done really well. The only real thing I don't care for is the manual saves. I know I was called a save baby in the comments because I complained that I don't like when like when I can't save my game. And it's not always a difficulty thing. Sometimes I'm just ready to stop playing. I gotta go somewhere. I gotta walk the dog. I don't want to leave the game just running on pause because.
Or like you mentioned, you're one of our biggest modders on the staff. You write our modding column every week, and mods can create kinds of instability, graphical or otherwise, and mods can kill your game, and when you can't save, you lose progress, right?
Right. So, and obviously, I think if you don't want to manually save your game, if you only want to save when you sleep, there's nothing stopping you if there's a manual save in there. So it's my little crusade. I always want a manual save. I don't know if I don't think Bethesda will go my way with this, but maybe some modder will figure out a way. The console is also not available.
Oh,
and
so
I don't know.
You can't cheat.
Yeah, you can't cheat. And I don't know if that's deliberate or something they're planning on doing. I think that would be probably a bad idea. Not just, it's not just about cheating. You can do a lot of things in the console and, examine things in the world through the console.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, it's just in beta right now. You can opt in on Steam, so I don't know how much of this stuff will be tweaked or changed, but I'm really liking it. I think it's a really fun way to play. I was playing with my level 36 character.
Yeah.
I would really, when it comes out, I really want to start a new game and just see, what a challenge that would be. And I think the other great thing I think it does is like I tend to stop these games when I become too powerful. Like I haven't played in a while simply because my character was so well equipped. I've got everything I need. I would go through a raider base and kill everyone, and I wouldn't even stop to look around to see if there's anything I needed. This I think will really, you'll have that feeling that you have when you first start a game, where like every little thing you find is kind of a treasure, or it's kind of important, or can be used. And I think even at higher levels, with your carry weight so limited. I think you'll still feel that urge to explore and make sure you check and find everything. So I'm pretty excited. I think it's looking really good so far.
Great. Well, maybe Bethesda will hear your feedback.
Manual saves.
And make changes, take out certain butts that you didn't like or did like.
Right. Yes.
And the game will be better, and maybe there'll be some public outcry as well.
Well, I hope so. I hope people get really, really angry about this.
Yeah. But yeah, just the notion of traveling through the game and sort of having to plan your trips a little bit. Like, okay, I'm going to this region, and that's like a choice and a commitment that I'm making, and I need to maybe bring certain materials and be selective about that. And where can I stop along the way? It's like you're planning these little road trips, except there's giant scorpions along the way.
Right, and they've also made it so locations that you've been to take longer to regenerate loot and enemies. So you can't really get comfortable and go, well, I know that'll be repopulated soon, so I can make a quick trip there.
Cool.
It really will make you kind of, stretch out and explore more.
Great. Glad to hear it. So our last topic before we get to questions from our audience on twitch.tv/PCGamer. Tim, new Hearthstone expansion came recently, and you've been all over that thing. As a resident card man, what's sort of the one-line summary for what the new expansion's added and some of your deeper thoughts on how it's affected the game so far?
So the big thing, and you're right, we've written a ton about it on the site. It's too much, some people might say, but not me. It's 134 new cards out late April, early May, so still a little bit of time.
Right.
They're themed around, it's called Whispers of the Old Gods. So it's themed around these 4 old gods from Warcraft lore who live chained deep below Azeroth. I'm not a Warcraft guy. As you'll have seen from the thing I wrote on the site recently about trying it out for the first time. So I don't want to try and do the pronunciations or too much lore stuff, but like the big hook is that one of these old gods is called Cthulhu, same sort of Cthulhu type thing, and he's a legendary card. You get him for free. It's just for logging in. And the reason they're giving you him for free is because they've built 16 other synergy cards around him. And the way those all work is as you play those, they buff your Cthulhu, regardless of wherever he is. He could be in your deck still or in your hand. He might even be out on the board already. Wherever he is, he will get these buffs. And the reason that's kind of important is because when you play him, he does the same amount of damage as the amount of attack power you buffed him up. So he's kind of this big bomb, basically, you're building towards throughout the game. So that's cool. They've announced the other old gods, the other 3, they've announced one of those whose effect is less cool, and he resummons all your death rattle guys who are creatures who do something when they die. But otherwise, it's kind of like in the usual Hearthstone pre-release loop of like each day there's a couple of cards revealed. Everyone then goes, this is trash and it's unplayable, and turns out down the line to be wrong. Or they say, like, this is amazing, this is going to define the meta for years to come, and then the card turns out to be garbage. Hey, Trogsaw the Earthinator. The really interesting thing I think about the scene at the moment is, like, the meta, so, like, the kind of the popular decks people are playing and counting each other with is really boring at the moment. If you watch tournaments and stuff, you will see the same decks all the time. There's very little experimentation beyond kind of the odd tweak here or there. And I think what even more than the card set, what's going to throw the scene into an exciting new place is that they're splitting the formats come the same time as the new set comes out. So you have this format called Standard, which is basically the new set plus the old sets, but minus the sets from the year before. If this sounds complicated, it's because it maybe is. So we'll lose 2 card sets at the same time from Standard, which are Curse and Ramus, which was a little adventure one, and Goblins versus Gnomes. So a big bunch of powerful cards go with those. We did a thing on the site, Tom and I, about the 20 most powerful cards leaving, and it's some real heavy hitters like your Sludge Belchers and Death Spites. At the same time, they're also going to rebalance some of the really old cards, the classic and basic ones. They're going to nerf them. Nothing's going to be buffed. Again, to stop some cards which have become like ubiquitous auto-includes from being too dominant forever. Because the problem was essentially they'd run out of design room for some cards. Like, once you have a card that costs like 4 mana crystals and it's just insanely good, it becomes like you just can't make either you make something strictly more powerful or something which is situationally sometimes better, but you just kind of run out of room. So I think it's going to be great, but like and they've been quite, I think, elegant in how they've sold that to the audience, because when they first told me about it last year, I was like, well, people are going to lose their minds. Half their cards are going to be not usable in this big mode. But people now, I think, and largely because they are bored of the flavour at the moment, are just really excited and waiting for that to come along. But yeah, there's a little way to go. But we're as soon as there's a new card, we put it into our gallery on the site. And, we'll be doing a ton of stuff around it.
Great, sounds interesting. I mean, it's sort of cool to see how they continue to sort of look to Magic the Gathering for
Is it interesting to you, Evan? Really, I sense gritted teeth. Then
I like the idea of I'm not a Hearthstone player, but with Cthulhu, the way I understand it, like, they're taking advantage of the fact that this is a digital card game. They're not just emulating physical stuff. Like, they are doing stuff where cards can gain power when they're still in your deck, like wherever they are. They're sort of invisible to you. You can't find them. Where like the math is being influenced in that way, that you couldn't really do that in a physical game, or at least not easily.
Yeah, they're really able to play with that sort of stuff as well. So whenever you buff him, this like portal opens on the board, and you can see him growing and getting bigger. So there's a lot of fun. And the weird thing is, like, so when you have this drip of the card reveals, it's, like I said, people do want to take a dump on a lot of them, and some of them have been really bad. There's one called Tentacles for Arms, which is a tragedy because it's got a really good name, but is just absolute hot garbage. So you, and going back to what we were saying earlier about the Butchericity, people do get weirdly outraged when like a bad card's printed. They're like, I can't believe you've done this, Blizzard. Like this is disgusting. Like, because I know I'm going to open it in my first the first pack I get. People get oddly angry about even that.
I think it's part of the tradition at this point, especially in communities like Reddit. You know, it's part of the entertainment of being part of a community. You know, like getting, you know, being part of that mob, even if it's sort of like a mild one, participating in that conversation, hearing what people have to say. Like, I don't know, I enjoy sort of, it's partly because it's our responsibility, but like taking the pulse of how people are feeling about, you know, when a game is updated and changed. I mean, practically every online game certainly, but even certain single player stuff is being developed over time and changed over time, sometimes very dramatically. So,
have you ever posted an angry message on Reddit?
Yeah. Not that I can recall. I'll have to search through my long Reddit history, Tim.
I've done loads.
I make lots of sarcastic ones about other people's complaints, but anyway.
I've complained specifically about balance and design. But I'm a complainer, always have been.
But I would assume it's been reasonable complaints.
I think you might assume incorrectly on both counts.
I'm gonna have to start digging around for some of these.
Interesting. Well, thanks for catching us up on Hearthstone, Tim. Looking forward to that update later next month. And now's the time in the show where we look to our friends on Twitch in the chat area to ask some questions about PC games, hardware, VR, butts, whatever might be on your mind. And while you folks are coming up with thoughts on that, I want to remind you that we broadcast this show on Twitch every week, Wednesday at 1 o'clock p.m. Pacific time, but it's also on iTunes if that's your preferred listening to the PC Gamer Show mechanism. And you can also find it on our website, pcgamer.com/podcast. Okay, so this is good because, Chris, you got to play No Man's Sky recently.
Yes, we did.
Jeremy vs. Games asks, is No Man's Sky at risk of suffering the same high expectations and hype that preceded the release of Spore? Both bear similarities in what they promise. Sure, No Man's Sky looks great, and so does Paragon. So is it all hype? Are we all kind of just drinking the Kool-Aid, and it's going to end up being a bunch of procedurally generated emptiness?
Well, I mean, I think even though I played it for maybe 20, 25 minutes. That is honestly, you know, I share that same concern, and it does feel in a way a bit similar. I think maybe the problem was with Spore was it maybe tried to do a few too many things. It tried to be every type of game. You know, there was a strategy, there was exploration.
It was Pac-Man also.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, it was strange. It felt kind of like it didn't really have a strong... Focus,
I guess, exactly. Yeah.
I don't really feel that about No Man's Sky, at least not the same way. I mean, this is a game about exploration. It is, you know, pretty much every design decision that I talk to them about has been based on exploration, on pushing the players out to explore and to discover things. In terms of, you know, if it's just hype, I still don't have a great feeling for that. It is something I'm really excited to try again because I did have a really exciting moment in it inside of my 20 minutes. Granted, this was a very small solar system. There were 4 planets. I think they were overstocked with things to look at. But I still did really have a real, genuine, like, holy cow, I discovered something great moment.
Yeah.
It just depends. You know, it's going to be... It feels like for something like exploration and discovery, the balance is kind of on a knife edge. You know, if you're constantly seeing amazing things, it's probably going to lose its impact pretty quickly. And same way, if you hardly ever see anything great, you might get bored. So
definitely. And
kind of leaving that up to, you know, some sort of generation... You know, it's definitely tricky, and it's, you know, I can't really judge, but I do kind of feel that same the same feeling, like, is this really gonna work, or is it gonna be like Spore, where you're like, this is great, and then you kind of slowly back away from it, I guess.
Chris, were you able to get a sense from what you played of like how much stuff separate to the procedural random stuff has been like manicured in as like kind of handcrafted stuff to find, or is there anything like that to find? Because I feel like that's what I would want as a player, to know that there was some stuff out there that wasn't just like a collision of algorithm numbers.
Well, I mean, there is this whole sort of alien. There are alien NPCs that you can interact with
and like trade with.
Yeah, you can trade. Well, you can trade with them. You can. What we saw during the demonstration is you go in and talk to them, and they say something to you, and you have no idea what it is because they're aliens. But the more that you try to interact with them, the more you learn, you know, a few words. So, and there's also these kind of monoliths on certain planets that you can examine, and you'll learn a word. So the first time you talk to them, it'll just be, you know, bleep blorp bleep bleep blorp. But the second time might be, you know, bleep blorp bleep bleep. Gasoline, or something. You'll get a little bit each time. So, and you know, I'm not sure if that's. I think their placement is still procedural, just like everything else, but it does feel a bit more like that. You know, it's not just a random generation thing. There is other intelligence out there, and that's been placed there by the developers for you to kind of cultivate some sort of relationship with.
I think it's important to remember, I mean, this hype often isn't created by the developers themselves. I mean, if anything, I guess I'd have to go back and look at when No Man's Sky was initially revealed and what was their marketing messaging, what were sort of the promises that they were making about this experience, how did they frame that? But, I mean, often it's consumers themselves or press that are kind of building up this message of what this thing could be. And we get very curious and very excited, and we kind of extrapolate and kind of speculate and kind of push it, you know, just like 10% further of what the game actually is. And the developer's like, oh shit, like, then we need to actually build that. And it becomes that, and we can kind of keep pushing and like, oh, what if you can do this? What if you can do that? And I mean, I think Hawken is kind of a good example of something like that, where amazing trailer. If you guys remember that game, it's a multiplayer mech game in the style of Call of Duty almost. We're like, oh man, 9 people made this thing. That was like the big headline. 9 people made this, you know, and they're like, okay, well, I guess we better get like venture capital funding and go the whole like Riot Games, League of Legends route and basically build that kind of experience. And a couple years later, it didn't really catch on. So
imagine if Peter Molyneux had been the developer on No Man's Sky. Imagine what he'd have said about it.
Wow.
Sorry, Peter.
That sounds challenging. All right, looking for more questions here. Well, Tom's in our chat, and he's wondering, Tim, how will it feel when you're wrong about tentacles for arms? I think that's a Hearthstone card.
I think that's incredibly unlikely to happen, Tom, given that maybe you and I, both called that Dr. Boom and Grim Patron would be very good cards. And they were not cards that were picked out on by a lot of pro players, and we're not pro players. I'm confident on Tentacles for Arms being a dumpster fire.
Speaking of Tom Marks, I realize I'm the only bearded member of the panel today. And how rare is that? It's
fairly rare.
One other.
Yeah, Tyler's not here. James isn't here. He's playing Dark Souls 3, so...
That's not by choice. I would love to be able to grow a beard. Despite being, I think, the oldest person on the team. Just like, not happening.
We'll just never have the density, Tim. How sad.
Also, I'm older than you, so...
I thought maybe the hair would have migrated from here to there, and I could have had a trade-off, but no. Just not allowed to have nice things or beards.
All right, Russaru21 asks, will you guys be doing a review of Hyper Light Drifter, which is out just next month, I believe. Is that right, Tim?
Do you know what? During this conversation, I secretly emailed Tyler to say how we're getting on with getting code for Hyper Light Drifter. Yeah. So we would definitely be reviewing it. I think it might be being reviewed by someone in the UK. But yeah, we definitely will be reviewing it. We're excited to see how that game's come on. Looks great, actually. Let's see. I can't pronounce the name. Maitre Fraser asks, what do you guys think about Square Enix's episodic games policy, Hitman in particular? You guys played more Hitman than I did. Is this a kind of a cool way of releasing a game, or is it sort of a cheap
way of getting something out early and just working on it over time and not having a lot of content in the meanwhile?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's probably a judgment to be made when the episodes are all here and we've played them. I did play the beta. You do kind of worry when there's this sudden change in how a game is going to be released, I guess. You kind of get suspicious. I think maybe they're just not done and they can only release a bit of it. And then I totally understand those feelings, but I guess, what can you do but see how each episode is and see how it all looks when it's all out together.
Personally, I think thematically, on paper, it's a perfect context where if you think of yourself as a hitman, you're getting these kinds of jobs and missions, almost spontaneously or on a certain schedule, and they sort of arrive, and you're like, oh man, I got to go do that. And you almost have like these little seasons or jobs that you do, and it's irregular and sporadic, and that kind of lines up with a release schedule, perhaps, of that type. But
yeah, I mean, that does kind of fit into the theme. I think probably a lot of people would like to be the type of hitman that can sit for 60 straight hours and do all your contracts at once.
Yes, of course. What else we got here? JBG Blaze, a subscriber of ours, asks... Oh, I can't find it now. Sorry. The chat scrolled on me. What game characters do you guys identify with? Find sexy and or overtly offensive? Any sort of bad or weird or likable game characters in particular for you guys? I'm having trouble with this one. I like the Spy. I like TF2's characters on the whole. They're fun.
This question feels like a trap of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of
which game character are you most attracted to / do you search for on DeviantArt, Tim?
I once did on a different Nintendo magazine I was working on, or was redesigning. We had a whole kind of art section, so there was a lot of DeviantArt searching going on in those days, but it was mainly for Samus Aran. I guess I relate to Shepard from Mass Effect, but that's because I made that character and kind of of course I relate to them because I made the decisions. I relate to Solid Snake being miserable and sad, but he's much better at fighting than me, so I guess not. Who do I find sexy?
I definitely found my version of Shepard sexy. I had a huge crush on her. I really, even though I'm sort of telling her what to say and deciding her life, I was like, I really like her.
Yeah.
She was, I don't know.
Maybe that was what you found sexy, Chris.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's my perfect woman is I will write all her lines myself.
Strange.
I'm trying to think of who I relate to. I don't know. I don't relate to, super powered killing machines that I seem to wind up playing too much.
That's probably for the best.
Yeah, probably.
I want to say Faith in Mirror's Edge is quite sexy, but she's also quite boring, I think. So maybe that robs her of some sexiness. She's just quite dull.
Certainly.
But I like the tattoo and the hair. That's good. Has this got weird? Is the rest of chat uncomfortable or not?
I think they're doing fine. Okay, Russeru again. Russeru21 asks, Tim, how well does room scale VR work with small space to move around in? So yeah, you got the San Francisco apartment over there, like myself, and even in the office here, we've got maybe a 10 by 10 space for VR, which isn't huge. So
the short answer is it's okay, but you need to have a room for it. So I guess if you have your PC in an office or a study, I think you'll be okay. I played a game which I got really into. Again, it's a demo basically, but a game called the Brookhaven Experiment, which I wrote about for the site, which is effectively like a light gun game but done in VR, where you have these monstrosities rushing towards you, and you have this cordoned off area, obviously the room you've designated, which is probably about 3 meters by 1.5 meters, what I spaced out. And I was able to kind of move around just enough that I could kind of shoot and think I was like Neo or whatever. Just being able to move around like that is fine. The fundamental problem they have, which is what I kind of tried to touch on, but maybe not in a great way at the start, is how do you perambulate or walk, to use it in a less ridiculous way, over longer distances and really explore a dungeon or walk through a building. They have to crack that. And again, as I mentioned before, I don't think teleportation is the answer because it's too dissonant with most game themes. You wouldn't be in an office building and teleporting around. That seems odd. Maybe with like a cover shooter, it wouldn't be so bad. You can kind of just sort of zap from cover to cover. But TLDR, smaller rooms, I think will be okay and fine. But there are bigger questions still to resolve about like how you get around. Because that's been like a common thread of all the stuff I've seen, both on Rift and Vive. Is like there's lots of developers out there trying lots of different solutions, and I don't think any of them are really close to going, all right, we're the ones who've nailed it. But I think someone will, because I think there's too much at stake for them not to, and too many clever people on it.
Well, it is pretty exciting to really be at the cusp of this technology where a lot of people are just figuring stuff out. You can see them kind of sometimes clumsily, yes, like fumbling with different ideas and how to implement things, different control schemes, UI schemes, just menus. How do you do a good menu in VR? I think that's pretty exciting. I mean, to experience those mistakes, it's fun to give feedback about that stuff and write about it and cover it. So
there's also going to be, sorry to butt in, there's also going to be like whole genres, I think, without again being too Kool-Aid about it, that we just didn't know could exist, but are made possible by being able to play with space in that way. Like, to give some bad examples, there was one game I played which was a puzzle game that involved hacking, where you were kind of completely disembodied and injecting these viruses into this network. And it was kind of like, if it was on an iPad, you wouldn't think twice about it, but the fact felt like you were in this daft lawnmower man world, it just like is qualitatively so different. And even like Tom and I played like a kind of a card game where you're kind of both static and you're like looking down over the board and sending your troops out on that. And again, like not saying like, oh well, card games are going to be huge, but like there's all sorts of things you think wouldn't necessarily be a natural fit that are surprisingly effective. And I think there will be whole genres that didn't seem like they were kind of naturally disposed to VR. I mean, like we joked about Molyneux. Imagine like a really great God game in VR where you're like literally hovering over the world and plucking up people and moving them around and stuff. There you go. You have that idea for free games industry.
I saw one of those.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
it's been done?
it's called Giant Cop, and you are a policeman, and you're the size of Godzilla, and you're in a city, and you reach down and pick up criminals and throw them into jail. Giant Cop.
Sounds good. Wow.
Game of the year 2016.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us this week, everyone, and special thanks to Chris for driving all the way down from Sacramento.
Happy to
be with us here today. Thanks. And Tim, thanks for joining us here on the stream today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Great. And see us this time again next week, 1 o'clock p.m. Pacific, on Twitch, on YouTube as well. We post the show if you prefer that. But thanks for joining us this week, everyone. Thanks for your good questions. And see us on PCGamer.com. We're going to go get back at it, jump back in that VR headspace and see what sort of weird experiences it has awaiting us.
Bye.
Bye.